The warning we never hear does not arrive in thunder, nor in lightning that splits the sky. It is quieter than that, nearly invisible, nearly unspoken. Imagine a whisper in the dark of a silent room, a trace of something that passes through, not loud enough to rattle the glass, but just enough to disturb the stillness. In the vast silence of space, danger seldom announces itself in explosions. Most of the time, it steps forward softly, wrapped in silence, hidden in the ordinary, disguised as background noise. Humanity has always listened for the extraordinary, for the bright flare, the unmistakable sign, the clash of the unknown. But what if the universe does not shout? What if the universe simply waits, patient and veiled, leaving only subtle marks? The absence of sound can be more unsettling than the loudest cry, especially when silence does not mean nothingness but rather the refusal to explain itself. In every century, human beings have looked upward to the stars searching for an answer. The sky with its uncountable lights felt like a timeless stage, and we thought we were the audience. Yet the more we studied, the more the silence surrounded us. Even when faint signals touched our machines, even when our instruments trembled with strange curves drawn on paper, we often turned away. What we do not understand, we put aside. What cannot repeat, we dismiss. But the hidden warning is not in the repetition, it is in the one-chance encounter, the fleeting moment that passes like a bird's shadow over a field. If you miss it, it is gone. And perhaps that is the truest form of warning, one that appears once, never to return, daring us to recognize it in the single instant given. There is something deeply human about ignoring the faint. We are creatures of pattern, addicted to rhythm, needing confirmation through the constant drum of recurrence. When a sound is heard only once, our minds insist it was chance, refuse to believe it was meant, and therefore we let it go. But many truths of the universe do not align with our instincts. A star might burn millions of years and then vanish forever in one violent collapse. A rare signal might pulse through once, like a knock on a locked door, never repeated. There is no promise of rehearsal. There is no guarantee of clarity. Just one fragile moment asking if we are listening. And most of the time, we are not. This warning is unlike others. It settles not in the ear but in the uncertainty of data, in graphs, in bursts of static, in strange objects moving against expectation. It slips past like a shadow behind frosted glass. We store it as anomaly. We file it away as interruption. Yet in those interruptions, something waits. Something that knows we may never look closely enough again. The danger is not that the signal will suddenly strike us. The danger is that we never recognize what it truly was, and by not knowing, we fall deeper into blindness. Our deafness to the quiet warning is both scientific and emotional. On one hand, science demands repetition, asks for evidence that can be duplicated, insists on certainty. Without that certainty, we call it noise, interference, coincidence. On the other hand, our own fears push us to ignore what unsettles. When faced with signals that are not easily understood, human instinct closes like a fist. We laugh them off, or we reduce them into something less threatening, explaining them away before they press too heavily on our imaginations. Between the precision of science and the fragility of human fear, much that matters quietly vanishes. The truth does not always reveal itself boldly. Often it is folded inside silence, buried beneath the consistency of nothingness, waiting for the one listener bold enough to take it seriously. We lived through moments when warnings touched our world from the depths of space, and we turned aside. We believed silence meant safety. But silence can be trickery. Silence can be a mask. The great cosmic mystery is not why the universe does not speak, but whether the universe has been speaking all along, and we simply never cared to listen. The beginning of every story written in the stars takes the form of absence. Absence of sound, absence of presence, absence of confirmation. In the emptiness there lingers a pressure, like the pause before thunder. Though no voice emerges, though no words form in the void, the weight of intention is there. What is unspoken is sometimes sharper than what is shouted. Not every warning arrives with alarm. Some arrive hidden inside stillness. We are left with the question, are we wise enough, alert enough, open enough, to find meaning in what does not speak? Or will we let the silence roll endlessly, convincing ourselves that nothing was there, when in truth, everything was said? In the late summer of 1977, when most of the world carried on as though nothing remarkable was happening, a signal slipped through the silent ocean of space and touched a lonely telescope on Earth. The telescope was nothing extraordinary to the casual eye. It was built not to look up with glass lenses toward the heavens but to listen, quietly and patiently, for any whisper that might arrive from beyond the stars. And one evening, like a voice caught unexpectedly in the silence of a dream, the signal arrived. It lasted 72 seconds. No fireworks accompanied it, no dramatic announcements crossed the sky. It came and went, like a secret, like a breath, and it left behind only a sequence of numbers and intensities written across a computer readout. The values rose so sharply, so unexpectedly, that the man who saw them could not contain his astonishment. And in red ink, not thinking of history, not thinking of legend, he marked the paper with a single word of awe: wow. That single word would become more famous than the countless pages of calculated tables that came before it. It was spontaneous. It was pure. It was human wonder in its simplest form, a reaction to the feeling that the universe had, for a moment, leaned closer and spoken. The power of the signal lay partly in its mystery. It was narrowband, so focused that it resembled not the noise of nature but the design of intent. It rose, it peaked, and then it fell away into silence, like a song sung once and never repeated. In laboratories and observatories, repeated searches combed the sky in the days and months that followed. They turned their instruments again to the same coordinates, hoping in desperation that the voice would return. But the sky kept its quiet dignity, refusing to make a second gesture. There was nothing to hear. The line between astonishment and disappointment blurred until the discovery became like a ghost story told in scientific language. Some called it interference, some called it coincidence, some said it was simply one of those puzzles the cosmos tosses gently at us with no intention of ever answering. Yet others remained haunted, wondering whether humanity had, for one brief minute, been greeted, tested, or warned. The moments that linger most often are not the loud confirmations but the fragile doubts. The wow signal remained one of those doubts, drifting through history, often resurfacing and then being dismissed again, a tide that never settled. Because of its singularity, we chose to turn away rather than confront its implications. One event, one pattern in the noise, was not enough for us. We demanded repetition, something to prove beyond doubt that intelligence had called across the void. But the universe gave us no repetition. Perhaps it never intended to. Perhaps the voice was never meant to echo. Perhaps it was enough that it had been heard once, leaving behind the challenge of belief, of recognition, suspended in silence. It is easy to imagine the scene that evening in Ohio, when the numbers first appeared. The control room was draped in the ordinary hum of machines, the steady flow of data that usually betrayed nothing of excitement. Our machinery is built for patience, for routine. And then came the spike, tall and sharp, breaking the smooth pattern like the sudden cry of a bird in the forest of static. For the scientist, that spike was not just data, it was a question, bold and hanging in the air. And one man, with his pen, exclaimed the question that every human heart carried, "Wow!" A word of astonishment, and at the same time, perhaps a word of recognition. The silence that followed became its own kind of story. For 72 seconds, the galaxy tugged at us, and we were left with a trace of its touch. Imagine those seconds stretched across for decades since, every year a reminder that the voice was not followed by another. Humanity's attention moved on. Other discoveries rose in prominence, other questions demanded energy. Yet, like a melody half remembered, the signal floats behind everything, reminding us that once, the universe broke its silence in a way so sharp it could not be explained away easily. And when silence followed, it was not relief. It was weight. It was the weight of the unanswerable, the weight of the possibility that the cosmos gave us a single message and chose never again to repeat it. The haunting is not in the numbers, not in the sequence of the signal, but in what those numbers mean. To those who believe in coincidence, the event affirms their view of a random, blind expanse. To those who entertain the idea of communication, this is evidence of something greater, something that lies beyond our patience, beyond our definitions. For them, the signal was a whisper across the abyss, a testimony that silence is never truly empty, that the noise we dismiss may in fact conceal the only chance humanity was ever given to listen. So we face the uncomfortable truth, we do not know. And perhaps we never will. The wow signal remains suspended, like an unanswered question scratched in red across a paper no one dares to discard but few dare to believe. The legend of it is not exaggerated by shouting or embellishment, its legend is fed by silence. Every year that passes deepens its mystery. It has become almost a myth, but a myth born not of imagination, but of data, of cold measurements that have never been repeated. What makes it astonishing is not only its brief presence, but its permanent absence afterwards. For if the cosmos wanted to be simple, it could have echoed again, sent reassurance, lit up the sky with a second sign. But it did not. It delivered 72 seconds of meaning and then closed the curtain, leaving us unsure whether we had glimpsed communication or merely the chaos of chance. Between those two options lies the fragile truth of human perception. We are wired to need certainty, and where none exists, we create it. But in the space between certainty and denial, the possibility lingers. It is that possibility that pulls us awake at night, that fills the imagination of artists and scientists alike, that invites us to ask questions without promising answers. And that is why the experience of 1977 does not fade. It is not proof. It is not closure. It is not a story with an ending. It is the beginning of a conversation that may only ever have one side, waiting in the dark for ears patient enough, open enough, questioning enough to hear beyond silence. When the memory of that fleeting signal still lingered in the minds of dreamers, the universe unveiled another kind of riddle, not within the radio waves that brushed against our instruments but in the quiet arrival of a traveler from elsewhere. It was the year 2017 when astronomers glimpsed something sliding through our solar system, a stranger cutting across familiar orbits. It came without warning, unannounced, drifting in from regions beyond the reach of ordinary comets or asteroids. At first, it seemed like one of countless fragments of rock that wander endlessly through cosmic currents. But this was something different. Its trajectory was hyperbolic, not bound to the gravity of our Sun. It was not cycling like a planet or circling like debris. It was passing through. A visitor. A messenger. A fragment from another star. They named it Oumuamua, a word that reflected its role as a scout from afar, a harbinger sweeping through on a path that promised never to return. The world was, for a moment, captivated by the name and the story, an object so ancient it had perhaps spent millions of years adrift in interstellar darkness before brushing past our own star. But fascination quickly tangled with confusion. Its movement defied neat categories. It accelerated as it moved, not in a way fully explained by what scientists expected. No bright tail of gas marked it as a comet, and yet it slipped forward with energy that seemed too purposeful, too evasive for mere rock. Astronomers proposed theories, leaned on the mechanics of dust and evaporation, stretched models to account for subtle pressures. But unease lingered. A few brave voices wondered aloud whether it could be more. Not a natural fragment, but perhaps a fragment of intention. Perhaps not a rock at all, but something crafted, a light sail, a remnant, a vessel set loose. And though such speculation unnerved many, the thought refused to vanish, hovering like a shadow behind the data, whispering that once again a warning had brushed us, disguised as anomaly. In the silence that followed its passage, humanity folded the strangeness into categories again, labeling it comet-like, writing explanations that satisfied most. But the questions refused to sleep. Why had it moved the way it did? Why had it appeared at the exact moment when our instruments had grown sharp enough to notice? The possibility that it was a messenger or a probe remained suspended, neither proven nor dismissed, echoing the way the wow signal had echoed before, an occurrence that brushed our perception once and then slipped back into silence. 2 years later, as if the cosmos wanted to remind us that forgetting is dangerous, another visitor arrived. This one was known as Borisov, a comet, but not the kind our skies had long known. It carried with it chemistry that was strange, unusual compounds that did not belong neatly in the realm of ordinary comets. It was another fragment from far beyond, breaking through the sheets of our expectations. Like Oumuamua, its path was interstellar, rushing into our system and then out again into the dark. If one event can be dismissed as coincidence, what do we call two? A chain begins to form, a subtle arrangement of dots waiting for us to draw lines between them. But by habit, humanity looks no further than the immediate explanation. Another object. Another category. Another distraction, filed away under cosmic curiosity. And so, once again, the warning passed by, and silence closed in around it. Then, in the weave of time, more arrivals emerged. In 2025 the sky revealed Atlas, another presence sliding against all expectations. It came fast, almost too fast, composed of materials not easily deciphered, breaking apart and yet leaving behind puzzles that refused to be neatly solved. Atlas entered like a blaze and fractured with an unfinished story, whispering once more that not everything crossing our solar system belongs to the catalogue of the ordinary. 3 visitors, then, within less than a single human lifetime. 3 visitors with quirks, with mysteries, with signatures that unsettled the ease of classification. To treat each visitor alone is to reduce them to noise. Together, they form something else, a pattern. The quiet rhythm of these anomalies mirrors the rhythm of the wow signal. Something arrives. It unsettles. It refuses to repeat. And then it is gone. The silence becomes heavier because it is no longer the silence of nothing happening, it is the silence that follows a message. The universe seems to offer us moments, fleeting and fragile, daring us to connect them, daring us to understand their continuity. But our nature is prone to fragments. We classify each as separate, each as isolated. We prefer boundaries, the comfort of compartments. Yet those compartments betray us, for the true message lies only when we see them together. Imagine the perspective of another intelligence if intention hides behind these arrivals, watching humanity as it struggles with its own reluctance. They do not send loud war drums or flashing lights. They send quiet markers. A line here, a fragment there. They let the silence stretch in between, testing not our ability to measure but our willingness to believe. To those who dismiss, the universe seems idle. To those who dare to hold the fragments together, the universe seems suddenly rich with signals, shimmering with layered warnings. The strangeness of Oumuamua, the unusual chemistry of Borisov, the sharp haste of Atlas, each one answered the earlier echoes of 1977, and yet we treated them again as isolated noise. What does it mean to ignore? What does it mean when the quietest warnings arrive and we close our eyes, content to domesticate anomalies into ordinary categories? It means we are unprepared, unready to face the possibility that the silence around us is alive with meaning. It means that the very act of waiting for certainty blinds us to the scattered signs that may already surround us. The cosmos does not behave according to our comfort. It does not line up signals in neat repetition. It brushes against us once, then vanishes forever. Rocks sweep through from beyond, carrying the texture of alien stars, never to return. Data spikes once across a printout, never to echo. We wait for reassurance, but reassurance is never promised. Perhaps the test is not in the signal itself but in our vision, in our courage to take one gesture seriously, to believe a chain of anomalies tells a story. Perhaps the universe is not asking us to measure, but to recognize. And as each visitor returns to interstellar darkness, the silent resumes, thick and heavy. Humanity remains caught in that silence, torn between skepticism and awe, science and myth, categories and mysteries. We wait always for a louder sign, a clearer symbol, a second appearance. But the warnings may not come that way. They may come only once, each a rare brush stroke across the dark canvas of infinity. And if we refuse to connect them, the painting disappears, leaving us alone again, convinced that the canvas is empty when in truth it has already been marked. Silence is often mistaken for absence, but sometimes silence is the most deliberate form of presence. After the suddenness of a signal, after the strangeness of a visitor cutting through our solar system and leaving behind unsettled questions, what follows is a silence that weighs heavier than sound. It presses against the mind, not as an empty void, but as a deliberate pause, like a speaker who finishes a single sentence and then refuses to continue, leaving us aching to know more. The passing of Oumuamua, the unusual chemistry of Borisov, the swift disintegration of Atlas, all these were notes played once, and then the sky returned to its stillness. The silence that followed felt intentional, as though the absence itself was part of the message. The human instinct is to wait. We build our confidence on repetition, on patterns that come again and again. A single flare of mystery is dismissed unless it returns to prove itself. Yet what if return is not the rule of the universe? What if the very essence of the message is that it shall never be repeated? That you either notice it the one time it passes, or you lose it forever. In that sense, silence is not a void but a provocation. It challenges us to acknowledge what has already been given instead of waiting endlessly for it to happen again. Think of how silence works in music. A single pause between notes may carry more weight than the chords surrounding it. The listener leans forward, waiting to hear what comes next, the absence of sound charged with anticipation. In the same way, the universe has given us pauses that are filled not with nothingness but with implication. After the wow signal, decades of silence were not an accident but a continuation of the message. After interstellar objects sliced across our awareness, their departure was not the end of the story but part of a deliberate rhythm: the appearance, the anomaly, then the withdrawal into silence. Each episode emphasizes how little time we truly had to notice. Each silence that followed bursts with the unsaid, the unfinished, the unresolved. There is a haunting power in a single occurrence. We long for echoes, but perhaps we are meant to live with singularity. Perhaps the structure of these encounters mirrors the fleeting glance between two travelers on a dark road at night, eyes meeting for a second before they pass one another forever. That glance is no less real because it never repeats. Its power lies in its uniqueness, in the knowledge that it only happened once. The rare event forces us to decide, is one moment enough? Is one unpredictable sign sufficient to awaken us to the truth that the universe may be filled with a kind of communication utterly different from what we imagine? The silence following these interruptions is alive. It asks whether we can live with questions that do not close, whether we can carry the weight of what does not explain itself. Science trains us to expect verification, but silence offers no such luxury. It strips away the comfort of certainty and leaves us face to face with doubt. And doubt, though uncomfortable, is the birthplace of wonder. It is in silence that our imaginations thrive, building possibilities, conjuring meanings the evidence alone cannot sustain. Those 72 seconds in 1977 would be less legendary had they been immediately repeated. The absence that followed carved them into mystery, transforming them into legend. Likewise, the visitors from interstellar space would be less compelling had they come repeatedly, predictably, as if on schedule. It was their singularity that sharpened their strangeness. Deep time does not move in rhythms we recognize. Civilizations rise and fall like sparks, lasting mere instants on the canvas of cosmic history. A single event, seen from our perspective, feels like an anomaly. But in the vast scale of the universe, that single event may have been designed to occur once in a span of centuries, or millennia, and then vanish deliberately. To ask for another is to misunderstand the dimension of time in which such signals may be constructed. To the universe, 72 seconds of sound in 1977 may stretch like a monument across 1,000 years of waiting. To us, it is maddeningly brief, painfully inconclusive. But to whatever designs the message, it may be more than enough. There is therefore a strange possibility that the silence is the test. We are not asked simply to notice the noise but to live with its absence, to endure the years in between, to resist the temptation of dismissal. Silence asks, will you remember? Will you keep watch, even when nothing happens again? Will you value the message, though it is never repeated, though no confirmation ever arrives? It is a difficult test, for human beings long for permanence, for certainty, for recurrence. But the richness of silence lies in its refusal to provide any of these. Look again at the pattern. A signal, then nothing. A strange visitor, then nothing. A chemical riddle, then nothing. A swift apparition, then nothing. Each time we are left alone again, staring into the dark, tempted to believe that nothing occurred, tempted to erase the memory of what unsettled us. Yet the memory clings. Why? Because the silence after is louder than the event itself. It is the silence that forces us to reflect, to magnify the importance of the anomaly, to wonder whether something immense stands just out of sight, hidden not in the noise but in the absence. The silence transforms the moment into a symbol. Without it, the moment would remain mere data. With it, the moment becomes myth, becomes rumor, becomes the fragment of a warning that refuses to fade. There is a profound lesson in the psychology of waiting. When we are denied repetition, we must decide whether to treasure the single occurrence or discard it. The wow signal is treasured precisely because it was not repeated. Oumuamua is fascinating precisely because it never returned. Borisov and Atlas are haunting precisely because they rushed through once and then were gone. In their departures, these anomalies echo the same rhythm, inviting us not to dismiss but to decipher the pattern hidden in their silence. To live with silence is to accept uncertainty, and to accept uncertainty is to be awake. Sleep, in its metaphorical sense, is the comfort of ignoring what we cannot explain. But wakefulness is the ability to hold on to mystery, to admit that silence may be saying something profound without ever spelling it out. Perhaps the universe is not hiding. Perhaps it has already spoken, and now it waits in silence for us to prove that we were listening. The silence is the space left open for our response. In the spaces between signals and objects, in the vast hush after their appearance, lies the heart of the message. The silence is not a dismissal. It is a question. It is the pause that follows the knock on the door, making us wonder whether we are bold enough to open it. Silence challenges us more than sound ever could. For sound commands attention, but silence leads it to us to decide whether we will pay attention at all. And more often than not, humanity chooses to fill silence with denial rather than meaning. But denial does not erase the past. The wow signal was written. The visitors were observed. The anomalies catalogued. They remain on record. Silence cannot erase them. What silence does is amplify their strangeness, remind us that their presence was rare, precious, fragile. The echo of absence strengthens the significance of what has been. It compels us slowly, over years, to return to those memories and reconsider them. Silence has a way of growing heavier with time, pulling our attention back toward the very thing we tried to dismiss. The pattern, then, is not sound followed by silence. The pattern is message followed by memory. Silence ensures that memory deepens, that questions multiply, that the fragility of the moment grows more luminous the farther it recedes. The danger is not that the signal was too short or that the visitor too brief. The danger is that silence eventually leads to forgetting, that humanity's short attention will decide at last that what came and went meant nothing at all. Silence becomes not just part of the message but a weapon against the longevity of memory. It is a race between our ability to remember and our willingness to forget. And so we live now in the long silence, the span between one strange visitor and the next, one mysterious signal and the faint hope of another. We wait with instruments turned toward the heavens, listening and watching, caught between skepticism and longing. Every day that passes without confirmation tempts us to dismiss what has already been. But in doing so, we ignore perhaps the deepest truth that the silence itself was designed as part of the communication, a deliberate reminder that what matters does not repeat for our satisfaction. What matters may appear only once. That is all it needs to do. That is all it was ever meant to do. Human perception has always been both our strength and our weakness. We are creatures of patterns, creatures of insistence, endlessly demanding that the universe produce familiar rhythms before we accept what we have seen. The stars themselves bear witness to this tendency, for since ancient times, humans have traced constellations into the sky, binding scattered points of light into pictures that satisfy our need for meaning. And yet, when the unfamiliar truly crosses our senses, a sound we cannot categorize, a visitor whose orbit does not repeat, we struggle. We hesitate. We wrap the event quickly in caution, labeling it an error, a misread, a trick of data, because to acknowledge it openly is to risk our composure. That is the paradox. We are capable of building instruments sensitive enough to catch whispers from light years away, but we are afraid of what those whispers might mean. The scientist lives under pressure stronger than most realize. Every discovery must not only be observed, but verified and replicated. Institutions demand it. Colleagues expect it. Entire careers rise and fall on whether data can be repeated, patterns reconfirmed, signals observed under fresh scrutiny. Yet the universe seldom offers repetition. The sky does not perform on command, and the strange arrivals of its messages, the fleeting signal, the solitary visitor, refuse to bend to scientific protocol. The result is hesitation. Many see anomalies, but only few are willing to declare them for what they might truly be. Others hide behind careful language, registering doubt but never wonder, for fear that boldness will be seen as recklessness. And so the strangest findings are hidden beneath language of caution, shelved into archives, lost beneath layers of scientific restraint. There is also the matter of ridicule. For centuries, any suggestion of life beyond Earth has floated in the uneasy space between science and imagination. To speak too openly is to risk mockery. To publish too grandly is to risk exile from serious dialogue. In that atmosphere, strange data becomes dangerous to the reputation of the one who reports it. The safer path is to explain it away, to find a natural mechanism, however strained, and present it as conclusion. Better to be wrong within reason than to be right beyond reason. And so the silence thickens, not only from the cosmos, but from within ourselves. We train one another to keep our astonishment private, to file our wonder away in notebooks that never see the light. That fear of embarrassment is itself a wall, keeping humanity deaf to warnings that do not arrive in the shape of certainty. Imagination, which fuels discovery, is too easily suffocated by our need for certainty. Yet certainty is rarely offered in matters that truly matter. A child looking up at the night sky can see possibilities that grown minds dismiss, and sometimes that innocence is closer to the truth than all our models. But adulthood demands proofs that the cosmos does not easily deliver. And thus, we close ourselves within the cage of what seems reasonable, ignoring what unsettles, dismissing what cannot be tested again. The result is a blindness of our own making. Think of the wow signal once more, or the sudden presence of interstellar travelers. Each time, humanity looked, recorded, wondered briefly, then slipped back into the comfort of forgetting. The very structure of scientific method discouraged us from embracing the event. Without repetition, without second confirmation, it became safer to dismiss it, to declare it noise. The cost of that dismissal may be far greater than we realize. For what if these anomalies were never meant to repeat? What if they belong to a language of singular encounters? By waiting for verification, we may have already missed the point. Our perception falters also because of fear that runs deeper than ridicule, the fear of insignificance. To acknowledge that a signal was truly sent, or that a visitor truly bore meaning, is to admit that we are not the center, not even the pioneers of intelligence. It is to accept that others may exist who are older, wiser, moving silently around us without need for announcement. That thought is staggering, a blow to our pride, a reminder of our fragility. Easier, then, to deny. Easier to chalk it up to coincidence, to physics, to misunderstanding. We cling to explanations that reduce the extraordinary into the ordinary, and in the process we sacrifice the opportunity to glimpse the extraordinary in its true light. This fear is written into history itself. Every great discovery once lived first in a place of ridicule. Early visions of the solar system displacing Earth were laughed at. Early thoughts of invisible forces, gravity, atoms, radiation, too, were dismissed. Yet persistence forced them into reality. What makes cosmic warnings different is their refusal to be repeated. If we dismiss them quickly, they pass forever beyond our reach. There is no persistence to rescue them, no repetition to save them. The test is sharper, whether we can be brave enough to treat anomalies as important without waiting for the comfort of certainty that may never arrive. And so we stand now, halfway blind, our eyes sharp enough to catch the fleeting, but our minds hesitant enough to let the fleeting slip away. We tell ourselves we are scientific, that caution protects us, but caution in excess becomes paralysis. If the cosmos sends us rare hints, precision without imagination will leave us deaf. We measure, yes. We record, yes. But we dismiss, too swiftly, too eagerly. Our greatest enemy is the speed with which we call mystery a mistake. There is a difference between questioning and dismissing. Questioning holds the mystery open, leaves room for the possibility that the extraordinary is real, even if not yet explained. Dismissing closes the door, labels the anomaly unworthy, locks it away so tightly that future generations may never rediscover it. One posture enriches, the other impoverishes. Which posture we choose will decide whether strange signals and peculiar visitors become the genesis of a new chapter of humanity, or whether they remain lonely curiosities buried in forgotten archives. Our minds are conditioned to seek symmetry, to yearn for patterns. But perhaps the ultimate pattern is asymmetry itself, the single event, the lone visitor, the short signal that leaves behind an imbalance we cannot resolve. Our unwillingness to honor these irregularities is not only a scientific limitation, it is a philosophical one. We are blind not because the signals are faint, but because we are unwilling to live with their strangeness. When we look at events one by one, they seem fragile, almost meaningless, like grains of sand scattered by the wind. A signal detected decades ago, a sharp spike across the monitors that lasted only minutes. A visitor sweeping in through the solar system, a comet that disobeyed expectations, a fragment of stone or ice from another sun. Another year, another anomaly, another curious irregularity tucked into journals and reports. Seen separately, each can be explained away, dismissed as a coincidence, reduced to something small. But when viewed together, these events begin to resemble threads woven into a pattern, threads that demand attention when they are gathered side by side. The problem is that our eyes are trained to separate, not to unify. Modern science insists that every phenomenon must stand alone, dissected, tested, verified in isolation. But the anomalies we face are not meant to be isolated. Their meaning stands not within a single occurrence but across the chain of many. The wow signal, the unusual acceleration of Oumuamua, the chemistry of Borisov, the swift transit of Atlas, each of these may look ambiguous on its own. Taken together, however, they sketch a form too suggestive to ignore. Scattered dots become a constellation. Silence between them becomes a measure of rhythm. And once we adjust our eyes, we begin to see that the universe has been marking a path, leaving us fragments of a story we were too cautious to recognize. The pattern reveals something deeper: the pace is accelerating. For decades after 1977, nothing quite like the wow signal returned. For 40 years we lived in silence. Then in the space of less than a decade, not one but 3 interstellar visitors swept through. Each one stranger than the last, each one more difficult to fit into known categories. One behaved too much like a ship, the next carried chemistry that implied another environment, the third came quickly and broke apart before we could hold it long. If randomness ruled, we would expect their appearances to be scattered across millennia, not compressed so close together in our lifetimes. The compression itself whispers of design. Picture it as the tolling of a distant bell. At first, we hear a single strike so faint that we wonder if it was real. Time passes. Just when we begin to forget, another strike echoes, and then another, closer this time, tighter in rhythm, building in urgency. The sound does not need to form a melody to be meaningful. The rhythm alone is enough to stir us. The objects passing by, the signals appearing in their lonesome irregularity, are like those bell strikes across centuries, waking us from sleep, warning us that the pace is not random, that tempo itself is the key to understanding. Yet still we hesitate, because the human mind clings to the isolated view. We fail to read the chain, treating each as an isolated disturbance. In this way, our own method blinds us to the pattern. But patterns wait patiently. They do not beg to be noticed. They reveal themselves only when a perspective wide enough, patient enough, lifts above the noise of separate details and dares to see them together. Only then do the pieces fit. Imagine spreading across a dark table the fragments of several broken jars. At first glance, each shard seems alone, sharp and empty. But when aligned, the edges match, the curves reform, and suddenly you see the outline of a vessel that once held something precious. That is how anomalies behave. They bewilder when studied alone, but reveal their true shape when fit beside their kin. The pattern then asks, do you see the vessel, or are you still staring at shards? Each fragment carries its own resonance. The wow signal whispers of artificial precision, tuned in a way that natural phenomena rarely mimic. Oumuamua whispers of motion too curious, a trajectory accelerating as though nudged by intent. Borisov whispers of a chemistry too alien, too different from what we know of comets formed in our system. Atlas whispers of speed and transformation, a brief apparition that dissolves before its secrets can be studied. Alone, they remain whispers. But aligned, they sound like echoes of the same tongue, a sequence of gestures pointing toward a larger communication. The increase in frequency is not only mathematical but emotional. We have moved from waiting 40 years for a single sign to encountering a cluster of them within just a handful of years. The sky did not suddenly change to produce them. Our awareness shifted. Our instruments sharpened. Our vigilance increased. And perhaps it was meant to. Perhaps the universe has always left such signs scattered, but only now are we capable of noticing enough to piece them together. Awareness itself may be the threshold. Recognition may be the requirement. This raises a question that hums beneath all others: are these fragments warnings, and if so, of what? When a message is incomplete, we are tempted to turn away, claiming it is incomprehensible. But even fragments can reveal intention. When a person sends incomplete transmissions, the fragment still carries urgency. It was worth sending, even knowing it might not be understood. Perhaps the scattered anomalies around us are fragments of such urgency. If they cluster closer together over time, then the urgency is rising. If their mysteries deepen rather than resolve, then the message is pressing forward, insisting we grow bold enough to connect the dots before the chain tightens further. Years might pass, decades might widen between events, but the acceleration of their appearance hints that waiting for a perfect signal is folly. The perfect signal may never arrive. Perfection might never be given. Instead, uneven fragments accumulate, testing whether humanity is capable of building meaning from imperfection, whether perspective can grow beyond single anomalies. We are being asked not to analyze signals as isolated but to read the entire canvas, one mark at a time. There is also the deep suspicion that once a chain begins, it does not stop. Each event builds on the last. Each new anomaly sharpens the urgency of those before. The wow signal remains haunting, but in the presence of Oumuamua its echo feels louder. Oumuamua startled, but in the presence of Borisov it seemed less like chance, more like a phase. Borisov astonished, but with Atlas rising behind it, the chain gained force, threatened to carve something across history as stone. The link between them demands recognition. A line is being drawn whether we notice it or not. And the closer the dots fall together, the brighter the line burns. It may not be coincidence that this clustering has unfolded just as human civilization has reached a critical threshold. For the first time in history, our instruments span the sky, our networks share information globally, and our species can preserve anomalies rather than let them dissolve into myth. Perhaps the sequence was timed with our readiness. Perhaps the chain could never begin earlier because we lacked the tools to perceive it. And now that we can see, the fragments come more quickly. The challenge is no longer detection, it is interpretation. Interpretation means surrendering the comfort of the isolated view. It means telling ourselves that silence does not erase but frames, that fragments do not confuse but connect. It means being willing to believe that scattered signs, when aligned, convey a message that grows louder over time. If we fail, then the warning means nothing. The chain dissolves unsolved, and the silence returns unbroken. But if we recognize it, then the fragments take their place in an unfolding mural drawn not by our hands but by the universe itself, or by those hidden within it. And once recognition begins, fear will follow, for the chain cannot be formed without consequence. To connect the dots is to admit that something is happening, something larger than us, something calculated. A warning that takes the form of rising frequency, rising strangeness, rising insistence, demands a conclusion. The time is shorter than we think. The bell is tolling nearer. The anomalies are clustering. The chain is almost complete. Every chain of evidence is vulnerable not only to the limits of observation but also to the weight of bias carried by those who interpret it. Human beings are not neutral recorders of the universe. We see, but we also filter. We measure, but we also interpret through the haze of expectations, fears, and cultural habits. No matter how pure the data appears, it passes through the lenses of assumptions that bend and distort its meaning. This is as true for astronomers studying the arcs of celestial visitors as it is for philosophers gazing at the stars. Interpretation shapes reality, and in that shaping lies our greatest blind spot. Scientific culture has grown with a hidden armor around it, a shield of skepticism meant to protect it against folly. That skepticism is valuable, but with time it hardens into inflexibility. When faced with anomalies that resist easy explanation, the first instinct is to fold them into what is already known. A comet must remain a comet, an asteroid must remain an asteroid, noise must remain noise. The possibility of intelligence, the possibility of encounter, the possibility of something greater is carefully avoided. These subjects have been stained by centuries of association with fantasy and superstition, and so the scientist who strays too near risks dismissal, derision, the slow erosion of reputation. Safer, then, to speak in the language of the ordinary, to ensure every anomaly has a natural explanation, even if that explanation feels strained and unsatisfying. The public, for its part, learns to mimic these habits. Culture wraps anomalies in the cloth of entertainment. Films are created, books written, series broadcast. The extraordinary becomes spectacle, reduced to myth or fiction. When signals or strange visitors truly appear in reality, they are swallowed quickly by the noise of culture, transformed into nothing more than echoes of science fiction. The very tools we use to expand imagination, the stories, the legends, the fantastic visions, become obstacles, making reality feel too similar to theater to be considered genuine. The universe itself could send us a message, and our first instinct might be to shrug, assuming it is nothing more than another coincidence, another story already told by some movie decades ago. This entanglement of science and culture creates a feedback loop of dismissal. The scientist hesitates because culture will mock. Culture mocks because science hesitates. Between hesitation and parody, signals are lost, warnings erased. Every profound anomaly suffers the same fate: first, reduction to ordinary explanation by official voices; second, reduction to spectacle by entertainment; and finally, reduction to silence as both forces convince the world to move on. This cycle ensures that when threads of pattern appear, they are left disconnected by design, scattered into the corners where only dreamers linger long enough to notice. Bias also comes not only from fear of looking foolish, but from the deeper hunger for certainty. There is comfort in closing questions, in drawing conclusions that feel solid even if they rest on thin ground. Calling an object a comet closes the question. Calling a signal noise closes the question. But leaving them open, admitting that they might mean something greater, something intentional, disturbs our need for closure. Humanity craves answers, even wrong ones, more than it craves unresolved truth. The danger is that closure kills curiosity, and curiosity is the only bridge across silence. The imprint of culture runs deeper still. Civilizations throughout history have carried myths of warnings, of omens, of messengers. Meteors were once feared as divine spears, comets as harbingers of doom, eclipses as shadows of angered gods. That cultural residue remains buried in us. When modern anomalies arise, part of the collective imagination instinctively treats them as superstition, as omen, as fantasy. And because we no longer believe openly in omens, we push them aside as if acknowledging them would drag us back into ignorance. Ironically, this denial prevents us from seeing that some anomalies may indeed be warnings not supernatural, not divine, but authentic signs written into the language of the cosmos itself. Cultural narratives of dismissal also serve a function of psychological protection. It is easier to laugh at the idea of visitors than to face the possibility that we are already being observed. It is easier to treat strange signals as fictions than to grapple with what they might require of us. Culture shields us, comforts us, gives us excuses to remain unchanged. But protection has a cost. It blinds us precisely in the moments when clarity is most needed. Warnings dissolve into entertainment, truth into myth, meaning into metaphor. The laughter of culture rings loud enough to drown out the whisper of the stars. And yet, beneath all of this, there remains a quiet yearning. Even as scientists dismiss, even as culture mocks, the human heart longs for connection. We peer into the night sky and sense something more. We turn telescopes outward because we believe, deep down, that silence is not the whole story. Even if our institutions and our entertainments close the door, wonder slips through the cracks. Wonder does not need permission. It waits patiently in us, ready to flare the moment anomalies appear. That wonder is our only true defense against the biases that silence us. It is the reminder that not all patterns are superstition, that not all messages are fiction, that not all silence is empty. If we are to piece together the warnings the universe has offered, we must confront not only the immensity of the cosmos but the smaller walls within ourselves. We must admit the weight of our own skepticism, the stubbornness of our own institutions, the seduction of our own cultural habits. For if the warnings are real, then silence is not the cosmos at fault but our interpretation poisoned by ridicule, fear, and pride. Breaking free of those chains requires humility. It requires reaching once again into wonder and giving ourselves permission to take the anomalies seriously, no matter how easily they dissolve under the acids of culture and cynicism. The chain of anomalies grows tighter. The silence grows heavier. The warnings grow closer. But if culture and science conspire to keep us blind, then we may sleepwalk into the consequences. We believe ourselves rational, but our rationality is shackled by reputation and ridicule. We imagine ourselves advanced, but our advancement has made us timid. To see truly, we must allow humility to cut through pride, allow openness to soften skepticism, allow courage to outweigh the fear of laughter. Only then can fragments become words, silences become sentences, and the chain of strange visitations take shape as message rather than noise. Bias is not merely a flaw of perception. It is an active force of erasure, dissolving what little clarity we are given. If humanity cannot confront its biases, then no number of signals will matter, no chain of anomalies will ever be noticed, no warning will ever be heard. We will be left staring into emptiness while the universe waits for a listener who never truly listens. And so perhaps the greatest threat is not the quietness of the cosmos, but the clamor of our own beliefs drowning it out. Every warning that is dismissed does not simply vanish into thin air. It leaves a residue, a shadow of possibility that lingers in the quiet corners of the human mind. We walk away convinced that the anomaly was nothing, that the silence can be trusted, that we were wise to ignore what seemed inexplicable. But time has a way of making such dismissals costly. To overlook even a single sign may mean overlooking the only chance at preparation we'll ever have. The universe is vast and indifferent, but it is also capable of offering patterns, capable of whispering in ways that could have refined our vigilance. When we discard those whispers, we trade potential foresight for ignorance, and ignorance gathers debt that always demands payment in the end. The cost of forgetting is not always immediate. It is slow, patient, invisible for years until the weight accumulates beyond what we can bear. Imagine a civilization ignoring all cracks in the walls of its dam because each crack looks too small to matter. Over years, each line ignored begins to lengthen. The water presses against the forgotten errors, the cracks deepen, and when the dam finally bursts, the society drowns in a flood it had every chance to anticipate. So it is with cosmic warnings. Each overlooked signal, each casual dismissal of a visitor's strangeness, is a crack forming in our understanding. We may laugh, we may shrug it off, but the cracks remain, waiting for the moment they align into catastrophe. What is most dangerous is not the event itself but the loss of readiness. If the wow signal had been studied with true seriousness, entire systems of listening might have grown out of it, deeper vigilance in the skies, expanded networks of attention that could have intercepted later fragments. If Oumuamua had been embraced not as mere exotic rock but as a hint of something purposeful, preparation would already have been underway to capture, track, perhaps even intercept future visitors. Instead, hesitation prevailed. Funding dwindled. Interest waned. Other distractions beckoned. By refusing to respond, we taught ourselves to remain passive. Our unpreparedness has become our legacy. The consequence of neglect stretches beyond missed opportunities. To ignore what may be warnings leaves us vulnerable not only to natural dangers but to cosmic intelligences whose intentions we cannot guess. If the objects passing through our solar system carry messages or are themselves fragments of technology, then by refusing to study them deeply we have already failed the test. If silence itself was meant as a challenge, then by ignoring its weight we have proven unworthy of the dialogue. What punishment awaits such deafness may not come as a sudden strike but as the slow realization that we were offered a seat at a conversation greater than ourselves and chose instead to mock or turn away. History shows us the pattern: civilizations rarely collapse from sudden blows. They collapse because they ignored every warning until the warnings became unavoidable. Ancient cultures inscribed omens into their texts: strange stars, eclipses, comets, and whether those omens had natural explanations or not, their significance lay in the reminder to remain alert. When vigilance was lost, when anomalies were dismissed, the ground shifted beneath them. Ignoring warnings is as old as civilization itself, but when the warnings come not from Earth but from the canvas of the universe, the consequences carry weight far beyond the fall of a single city or empire. This time, the risks encompass us all. There is also loss beyond survival, the loss of growth, of truth, of wisdom that could have reshaped our destiny. What knowledge might have been drawn if we treated anomalies as treasures rather than inconveniences? What new sciences might have bloomed if we granted dignity to a 72-second signal or to an interstellar fragment built unlike any comet before it? To discard warnings is to discard the possibility of transformation. Every anomaly, every silent visitor, is a mirror held up to us, asking whether we are curious enough to change. By laughing them away, we refuse the mirror, refuse ourselves, and thus remain trapped in smaller circles of existence. But the sharpest consequence belongs to forgetting itself. Warnings that are ignored tend not to disappear, they fade from the memory of generations until they are gone completely. The next minds to inherit the world may not even remember that the anomaly ever passed. What was once data will become dust on old records. What was once a rumor of something great will fade into footnote. And so the silence triumphs, not because it is strong, but because we lack the resolve to preserve our awareness. Oblivion is not the erasure of signs but the erasure of memory. Future dangers do not announce themselves with patience. They come swiftly, on timescales that mock our complacency. If the signs of the cosmos are meant to be warnings, they are warnings about scale of comets that could strike without regret, of energies that could flare with no care for who stands in the way, of civilizations far older and far stronger who may test us without ever needing to reveal themselves openly. To ignore even the possibility of such messages is to step forward unarmed into an endless dark. The folly is not in being struck unawares. The folly is in having been warned and still being unprepared. The silence awaiting us in the years after each anomaly was pregnant with challenge. It dared us to stay vigilant, to look back, to connect the fragments. But our kind grows restless. We grow bored quickly. The human imagination demands novelty, and once novelty fades, so does our interest. And that is the cruelest irony. Messages may already have been sent, but we have trained ourselves to let wonder expire. That self-inflicted fading interest is perhaps the very danger the warnings try to mark. Civilizations that cannot pay attention will not survive long enough to graduate into the galactic story. They will be erased, not by malice but by their own negligence. Consider that idea: survival in the universe may not depend on strength, or weapons, or intelligence alone, but on the subtle art of listening. A species that cannot distinguish between noise and message, that cannot discipline itself to remain alert across silence, may be doomed by its own indifference. In such a light, our treatment of the wow signal, of passing anomalies, of fleeting fragments, becomes a test far bigger than we realize. It is not about solving one mystery. It is about proving that we can resist the temptation to look away, that we can honor even rare and fleeting signs as meaningful. If we fail, then perhaps this is why so many civilizations never rise to galactic prominence. They edit themselves out of existence by ignoring what could have saved them. This is the true weight of forgetting, the slow suicide of indifference. We look out, waiting to be dazzled, waiting for fireworks, waiting for what cannot be denied, and in the waiting we miss entirely what was already before us. The universe has no obligation to shout. It speaks in its own rhythm, in its own quiet syllables. If we close ourselves to those syllables, then one day we may search the skies not for answers but for regrets, wishing we had listened when we could. By then, the silence will no longer be a question. It will be the verdict. Every silence that follows a fleeting signal, every anomaly that drifts across our skies and then vanishes into the void, presses upon us one question heavier than all the others: did someone mean for us to notice? The question lingers like a shadow, stretching longer the more we look at it. It is one thing to imagine the strangeness of a natural cosmos, vast and indifferent. It is another to imagine that something in that cosmos is deliberate, not silent by accident but silent by choice, not fleeting because it must be but fleeting because it chose to be. Intent is the gulf between chance and message, between randomness and warning. And it is into this gulf that humanity now stares, unable to look away, unwilling to admit how uncertain the reflection has become. If there is intention, then there is a sender. And if there is a sender, then there is always the question of motive. Were the anomalies signs of curiosity, brief gestures from another intelligence glancing at us as we might glance at sea creatures from the rail of a passing ship? Were they tests, offered like riddles, to measure our capacity for recognition? Or were they warnings, constructed carefully to give us just enough chance, but only once, daring us to find preparedness in scarcity? The motives may stretch across spectrums we are not built to understand: compassion, caution, challenge, even indifference disguised as a gesture. To name them at all feels like holding a candle against a horizon of storms. But the questions rise anyway, unstoppable, shaping our nights, shaping even the silence itself. The wow signal, when it appeared, had about it the quality of precision. It was narrow, strong, rising and fading as though controlled. Such qualities suggest technology. But technology alone is not intention, it is only capacity. A rock accelerated strangely through our system, it could have been shaped, or it could have been pushed by subtle forces. Capacity again, but not necessarily motive. What draws us into awe is the possibility that these events are not accidents, that they were meant to brush against our awareness. For to be meant is to be placed. To be placed is to be chosen. And to be chosen is to be in dialogue, even if an uneven, one-sided dialogue across centuries and silence. Why would anyone or anything choose silence as its language? Perhaps because abundance of repetition diminishes the value of attention. If the universe is older than our species by unthinkable orders of time, then those who reach across it may have long ago abandoned the need for repetition. One sign suffices. One gesture, clearly marked, once noticed, is enough. The wow signal could have been that gesture, entrusted to the patience of our species for generations, to see whether we would hold on to it rather than discard it. Each interstellar visitor after could have been its own gesture, scattered shards of a mosaic designed to be pieced together by patience rather than by demand. Perhaps that is the test: do we demand more than once, or are we wise enough to learn from one? If such fragments are deliberate, then their silence is a mirror. They silently ask, how do you respond when we do not speak again? Do you forget us, as though nothing was ever given? Or do you carry us like seeds through your generations, watering the memory until new meaning blooms? If it is the latter, then silence has done its work. If it is the former, then silence may never break again, for there is no point in addressing the deaf. But even if there is intent, intent is not always benevolent. Warnings can come in many forms. An approaching storm does not warn because it cares for us, it warns only because we can sense its rumble if we are wise enough to listen. A predator does not always conceal itself entirely, it sometimes reveals just enough to test whether we are prey that notices. The anomalies of the past half-century may not be gifts but ultimatums. They may be fragments intended to see whether we are fit to recognize the shape of danger in time. To fail is to be irrelevant. To succeed may be to inherit a responsibility heavier than we expected. We crave messages of friendship, of connection, of shared destiny. But what if the message is simpler, harsher, more primal? Watch closely. Change quickly, or you will not endure. The motives could also be less intimate. They may not be addressed to us at all. The wow signal might have skimmed us the way a radio tower's transmission leaks across a city, never meant for our ears but intercepted by our instruments. The interstellar visitors may have been cast-offs, debris from technologies used far away, careless artifacts drifting between stars. Coincidence may still shadow intention even when technology is proven. But even then, the silence challenges us. For if such fragments were not meant as direct communication, they reveal nonetheless that someone else has passed this way. And that knowledge alone, unaccompanied by greeting or warning, changes everything. Who, then, is the sender? Is it another civilization near in time to us, like a sibling species awakening in a nearby solar system? Or is it the patient remnant of intelligences so old they have already abandoned direct speech, leaving only traces behind like fossils, knowing that only those wise enough to notice shall walk away empowered by the discovery? Or, darker still, is it a hunter camouflaged in silence, testing whether fledgling minds like ours deserve notice before harsher actions follow? We imagine too easily through human motives, but we must admit, intention across civilizations older than our world may not resemble intention as we define it. Language, survival, purpose itself may be woven in logic utterly beyond our knowing. And still, the question remains, were we meant to notice, and if so, why? The silence that followed each anomaly is itself part of the answer. If intent were benevolent in the simplest, human sense, perhaps the skies would already have been flaring with unmistakable signs, repeated daily, undeniable. Yet that is not what happened. The messages, if messages they are, appear only once and then vanish. If intent exists, it is not spoon-feeding us, not guiding us easily, not leaving us comfort. It is leaving us doubt, arduous, heavy, incomplete. From that incompleteness we must build recognition. That is the nature of the test, and perhaps also the nature of the warning. And so humanity is left suspended in speculation. The anomalies exist. The silence exists. The question of sender and motive exists. What does not exist is certainty. That absence forces us back into ourselves, to consider the limits of what kind of meaning we can bear. It is easier to call the signals noise than to admit that someone may have whispered to us and walked away. It is easier to call the objects rocks than to admit that they might be relics of technologies so far beyond us they appear only as passing shadows. But ease does not erase the weight. Beneath every dismissal is the whisper of suspicion, perhaps these were meant for us after all. Intent, then, lies not only out there but within us. For whether they were meant or not, whether they were sent or accidental, their true significance depends on us. If we treat them as noise, then they dissolve into noise. If we treat them as fragments of voice, then they become voice. Intention, in the end, may not belong only to the cosmos but to our perception. The power of these anomalies rests not only in whether they were meant, but in whether we mean them, whether we dare to let them change us. Silence does not dictate what we conclude. We dictate what silence becomes. If we answer with blindness, then silence remains absence. If we answer with vision, then silence becomes message. What if that is the truest form of communication, that the cosmos does not hand us conclusions but asks us to choose them? What if the very absence of certainty is designed to differentiate who is ready and who is not? The incomplete message functions as mirror and crucible. Those who step away untouched were never meant to be part of the conversation. Those who burn within it, those who let doubt become wonder, who let fragments become signals, prove themselves awake. Perhaps in such awakenings lies the permission to step further. It may be centuries before we know. It may be never. But to live with the question is already to live differently. To live with the possibility of intention is to see every burst of static as potential voice, every visitor as a possible emissary, every silence as shadow for meaning. Suspicion matures into vigilance. Vigilance matures into preparation. Preparation matures into transformation. And perhaps that is the motive after all, to nudge us, quiet and unresolved, toward a more awake version of ourselves. The fragments have been scattered across decades, across generations, across the sky itself, and still the central truth rests before us. Signs have come, and signs have gone, and we remain trapped between doubt and recognition. The silence that follows has not silenced the mind but urged it onward, into deeper suspicion, into heavier wonder. Now, as the line of anomalies lengthens, as each whisper sharpens memory, we are faced directly with the question of ourselves. Are we capable of listening longer than comfort allows? Are we strong enough to resist the urge to dismiss? Are we patient enough to honor the single events as priceless, as if the cosmos deals out meaning one fragile coin at a time? Every civilization has its turning point. Some are marked by violence, by conquest, by collapse. Others are marked more quietly, by a question that either goes unanswered or is answered wrongly. For us, the question is whether we can hear what has no words, whether we can recognize what repeats not through echoes but through patterns of uniqueness. The future of our species may not depend solely on force or invention but on this subtler skill, listening to silence with seriousness. If the message was warning, we ignore it at peril. If the message was test, we fail it by neglect. And if the message was invitation, then our ignorance locks us forever outside the threshold of that invitation. The greatest danger before us is not impact from stone, not conquest from beyond, not explosion of star. The greatest danger is that we choose to remain asleep with our eyes open, living across the canvas of the cosmos fully capable of wonder yet rejecting it in favor of comfort. Sleep, in this form, is worse than dreaming. It is blindness by will, sustained by culture, demanded by pride. Those who mocked anomalies, those who joked away the rare moments, those who turned living fragments of warning into forgettable curiosities, they are the true craftsmen of peril. For it is in the accumulation of dismissal that extinction is written. The fragments will return again someday, perhaps nearer in time, perhaps in forms stranger still. When they do, what will we be? Will we still be the kind of species that demands proof before wonder, that mocks before perceiving, that comforts itself with categories even when categories break apart? Or will we have grown, learned the patience needed to see anomalies as messages, the humility needed to read silence as intention? That decision does not wait for centuries. It is already being written now, in whether we choose to value fragments or let them vanish again into archives of neglect. We must imagine the cosmos watching. Perhaps not with eyes, perhaps not with minds as we know them, but with the patience of entities older than our sun. If they scatter fragments before us, if they gesture once and then wait, they are waiting not for technology but for recognition. They are waiting to see whether we can rise to the challenge that silence presents. And the truth is that the cosmos owes us nothing. It does not have to explain, it does not have to reassure, it does not have to feed us answers. The patience is ours to prove. The silence is ours to survive. Perhaps the greatest communication of all lies not in words but in the reminder that time is short. Every acceleration of anomalies, every clustering of mysteries, every echo of silence says this one thing again and again: you do not have forever. Whatever events approach, whatever thresholds await, they come swiftly, without guarantee of second chances. The warning is not only about what is beyond but about how little time remains to prepare within. Time passes. Objects drift closer. Histories accumulate. And one day, silence will break not with mystery but with outcome. In the face of such truth, what is asked of us is not despair but awakening. To awaken is to treat each fragment seriously, to courageously remember rather than dismiss, to orient our eyes to the possibility of message rather than to the ease of forgetting. Awakening means we stop waiting for certainty to be handed down like stone tablets and instead grow the maturity to find meaning without repetition. Awakening means our civilization accepts silence as part of the message and responds with vigilance rather than paralysis. The decision rests with us, not with the cosmos. If we respond with skepticism and laughter, then we lock ourselves into sleep. If we respond with openness and memory, we step forward into awareness. One path narrows into extinction, the other widens into dialogue. Either way, the cosmos will continue. What remains in question is whether humanity will continue with it. The final invitation, then, is not from them but from us to ourselves. We must invite ourselves to listen better, to perceive more deeply, to prepare with humility. We must invite ourselves to grow past ridicule, to dare beyond caution, to believe beyond repetition. For if we cannot do even that, then what chance have we against the immensity waiting across the stars? The fragments were given, the silence was shaped, the questions are before us. The choice is ours. And so to those who have listened, to those who have stayed awake through this long meditation, I speak not only for myself but for the silence that threads through every anomaly: do not forget. Take each fragment with you. Hold the wow signal not as curiosity but as message. Carry the image of strange visitors from beyond, not as coincidence but as clue. Remember that silence is not absence but patience. And know that time, though measured in centuries of stars, is pressing heavily upon us. The universe is vast, but it is not indifferent. It has spoken once, perhaps many times, and it continues to wait in silence for what we will do. Let us not remain blind. Let us not throw away the chance hidden in fragments. Let us not be the kind of species that slept while the cosmos sent warnings across its breath. Instead, let us awaken, not through fear, not through certainty, but through the courage to treat silence itself as voice. My friends, my listeners, my companions on this journey across mystery, thank you for walking these long corridors of thought tonight. May the words linger softly as you drift into sleep, may the silence accompany you not as emptiness but as presence, and may you wake tomorrow with the memory that somewhere, out there, a message waits, fragile and unfinished, depending on us to complete it. Good night, and may you always find the courage to listen.